In the winter of 1959, a group of 9 young Soviet hikers met a tragic and mysterious fate while embarking on an expedition through the Ural Mountains. This haunting trip has since become known as the Dyatlov Pass Incident. It happened like this. Ural State Technical University is the biggest technical institution of higher education in Russia, with close ties to local industry in the Ural Mountains. In 1959, a 23-year-old student and member of the university sports club named Igor Dyatlov organised a hiking trip to the mountains with 9 other experienced student hikers. The group consisted of 8 men and 2 women. The goal of the 14-day trip was to reach Ottartan, a mountain 20 kilometres north of where the incident would take place. This route at that season was difficult. All members, however, were experienced in long ski tours and mountain expeditions. The group arrived by train and truck to the last settlement before the trail. They started their march towards Ottartan on January 27th. The next day, one of the members, Yuri Yudin, was forced to go back because of illness. His sciatic nerve was inflamed and the pain was unbearable. It would be the last time he would see any of the other hikers again. On February 1st, the hike started out fairly late and the group only travelled about 4 kilometres. They stored their gear and food in a base camp in the forest about 10 miles from the mountain. After setting up camp at around 5 p.m, they then had dinner at about 6. At about 8 p.m, 1 or 2 of the members went outside to use the bathroom, and that is when things went horribly wrong. Igor Dyatlov had agreed to send a telegram back to his sports club as soon as they had returned from the expedition. It was expected that this would happen no later than February 12th, but Dyatlov had told Yuri Yudin that he expected to be longer, so when that date passed and no message had been received, there was no immediate reaction. A delay of a few days was pretty common with trips like this. When no telegraph arrived, the relatives of the hikers started to panic and demanded a rescue operation be organised immediately. On February 20th, the head of the institute sent the first rescue groups consisting of volunteer students and teachers. Later, the army and police became involved, with planes and helicopters being used to search. About a week later, on February 26th, the search team found an abandoned and damaged tent. The tent was half torn down and covered with snow. It was empty, and all the group's belongings and shoes had been left behind. It had been cut open from the inside and the skiers had fled in socks or barefoot. A chain of 8 or 9 sets of footprints, left by several people, could be followed and led down towards the edge of nearby woods. Here the footsteps vanished, covered with snow. At the forest edge, under a large tree, the search party found the remains of a fire, along with the first 2 bodies. Those of Yuri Krivonishenko and Yuri Doroshenko, shoeless and dressed only in their underwear. Strangely, the branches on the tree were broken up to 5 meters high and the bodies had scratches on their hands. Maybe they had climbed the tree to escape something. The medical examiner recorded livor mortis on the back, indicating this is how he had died, but Krivonishenko was found facing up. This indicated that someone had moved him after their death. A day later, the searchers found Igor, the group's leader, and Zaineda Kolmogorova between the fire and the tent. Another 6 days later, they found Rustem Slobodin nearby. The 3 seemed to have died in poses suggesting they were attempting to return to the tent. A medical examination found no injuries which might have led to their deaths, and it was concluded that they had died of hypothermia. Slobodin had a small crack in his skull, but it was not thought to be a fatal wound. 5 bodies had now been found. The remaining 4 would take 2 more months to find. On May 5th, about 50 metres from the fire, the remaining bodies were found in a ravine covered in 4 metres of snow. Unlike the other bodies, these were much better dressed and also seemed to have been wearing clothes from the others. This indicated the others had died first, and the remaining 4 had taken the clothes for extra warmth. The examination into the cause of death and these 4 bodies would change the course of the investigation dramatically, however. The clothes from the 4 contained traces of radioactivity, and 3 of them had fatal injuries. Thibault Brinol had major skull damage, and both Dobinina and Zolotaryov had major chest fractures. According to the doctors, the force required to cause such damage would have been comparable to the force of a car crash. The bodies had no external wounds, and even more bizarrely, Dobinina was found to be missing her tongue. It seemed like the group had realised there was a threat to their lives and had dug themselves a den in the snow and laid it out with branches to keep warm. This would make sense, except the bodies were actually found a few feet from their improvised shelter in the deep part of the ravine. Also, some of the clothes they had taken from the bodies underneath the tree to keep warm were placed on branches, apparently unused. The deaths then of the last 4 in particular seemed like a mystery. Initially, it was thought that the group may have been attacked by indigenous people, known as the Mansi, who herded reindeers in the local area. Several Mansi people were interrogated, but this theory was quickly disproven. The hikers showed no sign of hand-to-hand struggle, and only their footprints were found. Also, the force that had killed some of the hikers was far greater than a human being could inflict on another. Soon after, in May of that same year, the inquest was concluded, and the official line at the time was that the group had died because of a compelling natural force. With no suspects or leads into a guilty party, the case was closed and sealed in a secret archive. The next theory seemed to be more plausible: an avalanche. The hikers may have heard it and fled for their lives, and then may have been crushed underneath its weight. Frustratingly, there seemed like no evidence of this occurring. No debris or broken tree line, and no records of avalanche activity in the area before or since. In the decades since, there have been other theories, ranging from the credible and concrete to the mysterious and supernatural. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I do all the production, research, editing and mixing, everything myself, and I really appreciate every listener that I get. You can support the podcast by joining my Patreon for just $5 a month, where you get access to some bonus content. I'm also on social media and YouTube. I'm glad you are enjoying It Happened Like This, and I'm very thankful for your support. Now back to the episode. Some people tried to explain the strange behaviour of the group and lack of clothing as hypothermia. An effect of hypothermia is an overwhelming feeling of being too hot, which can lead to people removing clothing. The problem with that is, why would they leave the comfort of their tent where they would have been warm and dry? And remember, the tent was shredded and cut open from inside. Why did they flee the tent in the first place? Next up, we have the idea that there was some kind of argument or trouble among the group that caused some kind of fight. It's true, there had been some romantic relations among the group, and maybe in close quarters that boiled over into jealousy and rage. But by all accounts, anyone who knew the group said there was nothing like this, and they were all close friends. And again, the injuries sustained by the last 4 were too great to be caused by any kind of physical argument or confrontation. People have put forward the idea of escaped prisoners and KGB agents, but they seem a little far-fetched. Not as far-fetched as another popular theory, that the group were attacked by a menk. A menk is a Russian mythological creature, similar to a Yeti or Bigfoot. This theory gained traction because of the damage to Dubinina's face. A more practical explanation would be small scavenger animals, or the fact that her face was submerged in icy water for a long time until found. The radiation on the bodies is a curious one. Some people believe the group stumbled across some kind of Russian test area and were killed by secret nuclear weapons controlled by the government. The bodies did have a strange orange hue to them at the funerals, but this is probably a result of the conditions, and the amount of radiation on the bodies was fairly minimal. The theory does hold a bit more weight than the others, however, because on that same night, another hiking group, roughly 50 kilometers from the incident, reported strange orange orbs floating in the sky. This group interpreted the orbs as explosions from some unknown weapon or bomb. It is theorized that the sound from the explosions drove the group from their tent and the radiation caused them to remove their clothing. A second blast may have hit the final four. Lastly, we have the idea that some kind of experimental drug testing was conducted on the group, and an unusual weather event known as infrasound, which can lead to panic attacks in humans because of the low frequency sound waves created by unusual winds. It has only been as recent as 2021, when the mystery was properly re-examined, that we may have gotten some answers to this case. 2 Swiss researchers presented findings that the cause of death was actually from an avalanche, albeit a very unusual one. One of the first obstacles the Swiss team faced was the idea that the slope of the mountain was too shallow for an avalanche. It had actually appeared that way, but in reality the slope was close to 30 degrees and the underlying snow on the mountain didn't seem clumped together, meaning it was slippery and prone to sliding. Next, they had to prove that there was enough snow to cause an avalanche. Diaries from the group show that the wind had been blowing at up to 25 miles per hour, and the Meteorological Society in Russia estimated up to 5 feet of snow would have covered the tent. Then they used computer simulations to predict the avalanche and estimated that it actually wouldn't have been that large, probably an icy block of about 16 feet. Small, but big enough to fill in the cut-out campsite in the slope. Would that be big enough to crush the bodies of the final 4, however? For this, they went back in history and turned to the automobile industry of all places. It turned out that in the 70s, General Motors conducted a series of experiments on 100 bodies using different size weights to see what would happen during a car crash. This data was ultimately used for seatbelts. During the GM tests, some of the bodies were braced with rigid supports, and this turned out to be a large clue for the Swiss researchers. When the hikers had hunkered down to go asleep, they had placed their bedding on top of their skis. They could then match the force of the impact back to these tests and see what force they generated. They concluded that a 16-foot block would be more than enough to crack ribs and skulls of people lying on a rigid bed. It may not have killed the hikers immediately, but would probably prove fatal after some time, especially if they ventured out into the snow to escape another avalanche. To corroborate this, expeditions were made to the site of the incident, and they concluded that the area was clearly very avalanche prone. In January 2022, 2 avalanches were observed under similar conditions to what the group had been subjected to on the night they were killed. That is not to say that these types of avalanches are not rare. They absolutely are. It was sheer bad luck that one occurred during the group's expedition. After the avalanche occurred, it is not exactly certain what happened, but the theory is that they cut themselves out of the smothered tent. 3 of the group had severe injuries, so it's probable that the less injured dragged the others from the tent. Far then from the theory of arguments or jealousy in the group, this shows their unique bond and friendship. The undressing remains a mystery, although hypothermia may have played a role here. And the radioactivity may have come from using camping lanterns which contained thorium at the time. The avalanche theory doesn't explain everything, but it is plausible. The orange orbs were never explained. For a lot of people, however, it's too straightforward, and the case will always attract strange and weird theories of what happened that night. People love a good story, and this theory may not be exciting enough for them. Personally, I think it was just a case of bad luck. The story is so gripping and interesting to people because a group of young people went out into the wilderness and never returned. There is a certain folktale or fantasy element to that, and it resonates with any of us who have ever spent time out in the wilds of nature. The timing of the event also immediately leads the mind into secret government programs, KGB operations, and unusual experiments, because both the US and the USSR were doing some crazy things during the Cold War. If anything, this story tells of the powerful force of nature, and mankind struggled to ever tame it. The group was well prepared and experienced. They were not amateurs, but nature doesn't care, And even relatively small weather events like the theorized avalanche could cause devastation to a whole generation and a group of friends. The supernatural side of things lends itself well to the local area. Take a look at where the incident occurred on a map and you see a vast area of land stretching out to the east. Russia is a massive country and sparsely populated in the north. Surely humans have not touched every part of this landmass, and maybe it contains mysteries outside of our current knowledge. If nothing else, the avalanche theory can give the relatives of the deceased some peace. Some in Russia have blamed the group for recklessness or stupidity, but the science shows that this could have happened to anyone, experienced or not. We all take risks when we venture into nature. It is this inherent danger, beauty and wildness of nature that calls us out there in the first place. It is where we all come from in the end. Who are we to judge these young people for embracing that call? And who are we to forget that Mother Nature, though beautiful, can be a true demon when she wants to be?